Charlie! Oh, yes!
It's on its way! It's there! The miracle on grass!
McCluggage kicks him into a prelim. He's got it. Brisbane have won. Bailey's kicked the goal. The dream comes true.
Here it is! The Brisbane Lions have done it! The Hawks, the Bombers, the Crows. They couldn't do it in the 80s and the 90s, but the Lions have gone back to back to back to become the greatest side of the modern era. They are football's invincibles.
The Brisbane Lions Fancast is back after a couple of weeks. Patrick joins me again to have a look back at the 2023 season. We'll go through, not game by game, but we'll sort of have a look at how the season unfolded, which players we liked the look of, a little bit of trade and draft and free agency news, stuff that affected us, not a huge amount, and what we can expect looking forward. You're also going to have a look at the all-time 22 that I put together, and I'll sort of provide you with some context behind that, and then you can sort of pick it apart and choose yours as well. First of all, how are you feeling? How's your couple of weeks been? Because I know you were quite unwell after the grand final.
Yeah, I got poisoned by some sort of one of the 100,024 and was basically bedridden for 2 weeks, and then the last week has been marginally better, but I'm able to talk. I'm able to do that in a bit, so I am, all right, fine.
Okay.
That's all I have to say about that,
Well,
really.
we'll take it. We were meant to be putting this podcast out last week. I don't know if you caught it. I put out a cheeky little 20-minute podcast in your absence. Just had a little bit of an AFLW update and talked about a few little bits and pieces here and there, but nothing of significant importance.
Nothing of significant importance.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. It's good to know how important I am, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, what's really been going on over the last few weeks in terms of football is like a lot without not being very much at all.
Yeah.
Kind of how I would describe it. We've had a couple of delistings. We've had a weird trade, and we got a player that we kind of were linked to for a while and kind of thought we'd get. So sort of things have more or less gone as we would have assumed, right?
I suppose so. It was a fairly, as a trade period, wasn't a huge one.
How dull was it? Like, I hate trade period. I hate the speculation. I hate all that sort of stuff. But when you have a month of people talking about like Zerk Thatcher and Radigalia, and you're like, far out, man. Like, where's the actual shakers and movers? And the answer is there wasn't really any, which is probably a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, I suppose the biggest name in the whole trade period was probably Jack Ginnivan, and that sort of only really happened in the last couple of days. Lachie Schultz is probably the best player that got traded. But Tom Duday's no slouch, so I think obviously he's got a lot of rehab still to go, and it will be a while before we see him take the field. But, I'm pretty happy with that acquisition. It obviously means Froggy's spot is under pressure, but we know that him or Darcy Gardner can slot into a tall defender role if needed.
Yeah, I think it's probably not a bad thing. Like, Tom Duday's a bit younger than both Froggy and Gardner, so
yeah,
competition for spot is good. And I mean, Froggy obviously surprised us this year. We didn't probably see him coming back into the team, and then he came back and was really solid. And ultimately, Gardner came back. He was probably a bit unlucky earlier on in the year, all things considered, because he came back for the Adelaide game and then the Hawthorn game. And I think he probably was made to look a lot worse than what he was just by the fact that the team played like shit. So, I'm largely happy that Dizzy was able to come back in and get a couple of good performances, particularly the one against Carlton.
Yeah, absolutely. That was obviously, that would be his highlight for the year. The other sort of movements, Tom Fullerton got traded to the D's, where he'll play VFL for them, I would imagine.
It's funny, after years of saying that he was kind of a bit of a, let's say, like a de-evolved version of Brodie Grundy, he has gone and replaced him.
Yep.
So, fair enough, I guess.
Yeah.
You get to sort of spend some time in a different city. And I don't know, man. Like Max Gawn seems to be a bit of a ticking time bomb in terms of injuries. He's been relatively injury free over the past sort of, I want to say 5 years. I know he had a bunch of injury stuff early on, and he had that fake ACL this year. But you never know.
I
Could
mean,
Tom Fullerton show the world? Probably not,
no, I
but
wouldn't have
maybe.
thought so. It's anything's a possibility. We also got that fella Jacob Ryan in from Hawthorn as part of the Gunston deal, which is good to have some sort of key forward insurance collateral on the list, because if Hipwood or Danaher went down, no Gunston, no Fullerton, suddenly we're relying on Darcy Fort to come back in the team, or Henry Smith, or maybe even moving a Wiley Buzzer up from the rookie list into the senior list, and none of those options really appeal to me. I mean, I don't know the first thing about Jacob Ryan either, so it's just good to have a little bit of depth there, and with the picks that we do have in this draft, I would imagine that we are going to be looking at some sort of key position players as well.
Yeah, I think it might be an element of just looking at some sort of smokies a bit down the old draft numbers. It was weird, the Gunston thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more, but I sort of said to you, I'm like, it does pose a slight problem, particularly as you said with Fullerton going out, but like listening to what Brandon Ryan said in his sort of interview, he says he seems to be a bit more of like a mobile key, which is wild given that they're all like 6'6" or whatever. He talked about his work at ground level and stuff, and the idea of being able to learn from Eric and Joe Danaher, is probably a good place for someone who has that idea to be able to do. So, fair enough to him. I don't think he'll see a lot of game time, at least for a couple of years, or at least hopefully he doesn't, because that would kind of pose larger issues. But yeah, sort of, not a lot to sort of get excited about, but that doesn't really matter.
No, we didn't do a huge amount, but we didn't really need to. But, I mean, neither, like, the teams around us necessarily didn't do a huge amount either. Collingwood's improved their list with adding Schultz in. Melbourne didn't do a huge amount. Carlton added a few, but they also lost a few. So Sydney were
probably the only one, that kind of, in terms of being as a finals team, that have improved. I mean, people are saying Port Adelaide have improved, but I mean, Radaglia and Alia, mouthful, in my opinion, really similar style of players. And, I don't think that they're overly the best one-on-one defenders, which I think is what Adelaide really needed. I got shown up in the end of Grundy going to Sydney, so fair enough. So I don't know whether, I can see Port Adelaide sliding a bit, staying in finals. I can see Sydney moving up into the top 4 next year. So,
well, it all remains to be seen. I mean, you never know. Anyone's only a few injuries away from really shaking up their future. Obviously, our list will change with Will Ashcroft coming back and Duday coming in halfway through next year, but we might have a bit of a settled lineup by then. But probably our biggest news across the trade period was Dev signing that 2-year deal, which is great.
Yeah, there was definitely an element of relief around that. I think we were all hoping for it, and I mean, I think as you said, it's like as short a contract as can be.
I mean, honestly, it's probably the best thing he could have done, because it's not like West Coast is going to challenge in the next 2 years. He's still got the chance to play in, hopefully, more grand finals over the next 2 years with us.
Playing more football to begin with is the important thing for him, and I think he's earned it. He's deserved it. In fact, he played that grand final with a broken wrist and was one of the, I'd say, better contributors. Or impact players or whatever.
His whole final series, he never really racked up a huge amount of the ball, but like his commitment, his 1%ers, and he's just, his tenacity was never questioned.
But I just think he's not playing the position to rack up possessions. He's not playing as a sort of inside center role. So it's sort of a tempering expectation to what he does in terms of the VFL stuff. And I think largely just most seem to think if he can kind of clean up his disposal a little bit in transition and maybe like kicking inside 50, he could change the way he plays, within himself and his confidence and stuff like that. So I'm happy to see him on, and I think he's probably a lock for the 22 round one next year.
I'd say so. I think, his spot is more or less settled until Will Ashcroft comes back, and then there's going to be a bit of a fight on for that position, and then, it depends where things are with Zorko, or, who knows what's going to happen at that stage as well. The other list changes we had, obviously, Blake Coleman delisted, Daryl McDowell-White Jr. delisted, and Beast Mode himself, Reece Matheson, delisted, not picked up else anywhere. I have heard that he is going to embark on a bodybuilding career, Reece Matheson.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, he's got the name for it.
He does.
So fair enough, I guess. As someone who previously has worked at a gym, albeit not in any kind of trainer capacity, in the old customer service, bodybuilders can all go and jump in a bin as far as I'm concerned, because they are temperamental at best and absolutely horrible at worst when they've been starving themselves in an extremely unhealthy way, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to do it. So that's my take on bodybuilders.
The other, probably more significant than we realise, changes to the Brisbane Lions over the last month or so has been in the coaches, which has been something we haven't seen a lot of over the last 5 years since Chris Fagan stepped in. So Mark Stone, who's been there 3 or 4 years as strategy coach, he's been shown the door. Jed Adcock has gone to North Melbourne, and Dale Morris takes a step up from development coach. He's going to take Jed Adcock's spot as a backline coach. Not sure.
Whilst an easy call, I did call that one about a month ago.
Yeah.
The Dale Morris one when Jed got let go. Yeah, I guess you can look at it and say there were elements of Adcock and Mark Stone, particularly when Mark Stone went. I read some pretty funny things of like, oh, we had a strategy coach. Which, I found funny. Obviously a bit less realistic, but look, I personally was very hard on Jed Adcock at about round 18.
Yeah.
So, might have even seen that meme I put up.
Yes.
Featuring Apu, Chris Fagan, and Jed Adcock.
Yeah.
So, I'd been critical of him, and I'm not unhappy to see those changes made, because I think a bit of fresh blood and a lot of criticism gets put at Chris Fagan, and I think probably unduly, and I've been obviously culpable of that. But I think he's a good ambassador, and I think probably a lot of the gripes that I've had have been with the coaching staff in a larger sense. And to see some changes made makes me happier.
We did make a pretty significant play for Scott Selwood. It looked like we were almost going to land him, but he, in the end, decided to turn it down and stay with Collingwood, so that was a bit of a bummer. So I don't know that we're necessarily going to bring someone else in unless we can get like a big name, like a Stuart Dew type. I think we'll probably just...
Mick Walters or something. Yeah, I suppose you'd be looking for someone like that coming in as an assistant who's possibly done AFL coaching, because you always see Ratton and Rutten and all of those people with the same names, all just like they're all bloody revolving door around each other in Melbourne clubs. So I think that's one element that's kind of a bit of a disadvantage for the interstate clubs, particularly the idea of being able to get in good assistants, because it's a massive lifestyle change, and that's probably where things like soft cap and Collingwood being a particularly wealthy club and the big Melbourne clubs being able to afford more like that, and not having to pay people to relocate. I think we all thought that Luke Hodge would be a pathway into being an assistant coach for us, which hasn't happened. Maybe that could happen. I don't know. Does he still live in Brisbane? I think so.
I think so, but I think he's enjoying his media career too much, and instead of just sitting back coding bloody footy tapes, I think he's just enjoying what he's doing instead. It might not be a career path he chooses to follow at the moment anyway.
To be honest, I can't think of anything worse than sitting next to James Brayshaw and BT in the Channel 7 box.
Well, that's why he probably positions himself down on the boundary line away from him.
Boy, oh boy.
Wowee. So obviously we're going to be heading into this draft. Our first pick is number 30, so it'll be a while before we do anything. We'll pick up some players. Like I said, we'll probably target some key position depth players. I don't expect anyone to come in and, light it up, but you never know. You never bloody know.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about the golden brown elephant in the room that is Big Jack Gunston's Brisbane Lions career?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
You kind of got to think why.
The way I see it, and this is based on very little, but the way I see it is, obviously, he had his dad pass away. He was in a pretty bad spot, decided that, Queensland was a fresh start for him, the ability to potentially play some more finals football and finish his career on a high. Our game style just simply did not suit the way that Jack Gunston plays.
Yes.
And by the time it all wrapped up, he thought, you know what? I'm here. I gave it a go. I'm still not any happier, and I'm not playing football. I might as well go and help Hawthorn again.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's probably a very palatable way of putting it, I suppose.
I mean, I'm sure it's definitely more intricate than that, and there's a lot more moving pieces. But I mean, at the end of the day, our team was better without him in it. Aside from that one game he kicked 6 against West Coast, we just looked better with Cam Rayner as the third tall as you were.
Yeah, I think he sort of needed a bit more precision going inside 50 rather than the kind of chaotic nature of what we tend to do, which is what is one of our sort of, bows to our arrow. Strings to our bow?
Yeah, one of the two.
Arrow to our string? I think I'm having a seizure. It just sort of seemed like a bit of I guess there's a lot that can be said for the idea of like when things going wrong, just being like, okay, didn't work. Let's just call it now and move on quicker rather than sort of letting it sort of have this weird like slow death decay. I heard a little bit in terms of like freeing up kind of a bit of salary cap room.
Sure. And we need to because Hugh McCluggage and Kitty Coleman both out of contract at the end of next year, and we're going to want to keep both of those guys.
Well, those two are probably, they were 1 and 2 in our finals player of the year, the Paddy.
Yep.
And they were 1 and 2 in the Lions finals player of the year.
There you go.
Boy, oh boy, wowie, thank you. Finger on the pulse. So, yeah, I think they're two people that could very, very much have All-Australian caliber years at any point.
Yep.
I think, Hugh McCluggage is probably feeling a bit stiff. They actually put wingers in the team this year, but whatever. Never you mind. So, yeah, I guess with that, the Gunston experiment failed. I don't think anyone's particularly cut up about that.
No.
I tried to really sort of, I guess, convince myself that he would sort of possibly be in our best 22 next year, or I think I saw someone sort of say like, "Oh, what are we going to do with Jack Gunston?" It was about 2 days after the grand final, and I'm like, "Why are we talking about this? Let the guy have a preseason and come back, and then we'll see what happens." Like, why do we need to talk about this? And now he's gone. We don't need to talk about it. So,
look, it was worth a shot, and I think we were all sort of like, I don't know. We were all caught up in Dan McStay leaving, and we thought, oh God, what are we going to do? Because he was pretty key to our structure. Oh, Jack Gunston will come in, that will sort of fill that spot, and he's a known goal kicker. It just didn't work. And we sort of evolved our game plan in that time to make it work without either of them. So, by the time that the trade request came through, the only thing that was sort of weighing on our minds as fans was probably like, well, now we're just a bit short in depth for key position players up forward. So that's going to be the issue. Now we've got Jacob Ryan in. We've got some players, and like I said, I imagine we pick some more up in the draft. So no harm, no foul. Hope to see him go back to Hawthorn and play some good footy. I'm actually really looking forward to see what Hawthorn can do next year, because the way they have been playing,
back end of this year,
yeah. I think Sam Mitchell's got that team ready to do some good things, and it won't be long before Hawthorn's back up there again. How annoying.
Yeah, back to the dark days of football, but yeah, well, I guess we'll wait and see. And I think I said earlier on the year that Sam Mitchell's kind of playing a different. He's playing, 5 years ahead of where he should be in terms of strategy and stuff like that, but might be coming up a bit earlier. They were beating some good teams in the back end of last year. So, no, whilst I don't think a finals threat, I think in the next couple of years very much could be.
Yeah, well, I mean, better to try and do that now because you don't want to be like lingering down the bottom of the ladder by the time Tassie comes in, compromising the draft. We saw what that did to us.
We know all about that, don't we?
Yeah.
Jeez.
I just remember looking back at when we were doing one of our nostalgic players. I think it was Billy Longer, and looking back at the draft at what pick he was, and the first
It was like 7 or something, and it was like, what was it? 14 of the first 17 picks went to GWS. It's like,
yep,
is that a thing?
Yeah. Oh, that's why we were so bad during that time. That'll be it. Great. So yeah, I think Hawthorn's playing that really well, and you don't want to be down the bottom when Tassie comes in because that's just going to set you back a couple more years. So, no, I'm looking forward to seeing what Hawthorn can do. And, if Jack Gunston plays some good footy again, I think that's going to be good as well.
If you've got a mate that loves the Lions, tell them to get the podcast into their ear holes.
All right, let's get on with the season.
All right. Well,
to which round one of my notes is, Gunston, how could this go?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were plenty of problems. Round 1 against Port Adelaide, Gunston, just one of them. The fact that nobody else showed up that day was probably the biggest issue for Port Adelaide when back in round 1 at Adelaide Oval. We did see a lot of our new recruits at the time, though, kick goals. Ashcroft put one through.
Ashcroft kicked a beautiful goal. Yeah. Just shimmy sidestep was great. Yeah, the first sort of 4 rounds of games were pretty frustrating, I think, just generally. Yeah, we got 2 big wins. Horror shows against Port Adelaide and a really poor performance against the Bulldogs. Glad we rectified that Port Adelaide performance in the finals. But yeah, just the Melbourne and Collingwood kind of showed what we could do. There was a whole debacle with the light system, which obviously was kind of funny, but also entirely not funny. And then, yeah, like after the Collingwood game, we hit a pretty good patch of form.
Yeah.
With sort of 7 wins in a row, which, if not for some sort of weird anomalies, like, Port Adelaide went on a pretty good run and Carlton and GWS also went on pretty decent runs. Like one of the longest runs of consecutive wins in the season, I think.
Yep.
Looking at it here, yeah, quite a lot.
Yeah, I guess at that stage it sort of was expected from us, not just like the caliber of teams we were playing, but I guess where we were in our premiership window and all that sort of stuff. Like everyone's going to beat North Melbourne at that stage, and we certainly did. 75 odd points, could have been a lot more because I think, what did we kick in the end? 22-20, so it really could have been quite the mauling. GWS was a tough game, and at that stage we were saying, they're playing good footy, they're just not getting the results, and once that starts clicking, they're going to play some really good footy. And I mean, they made a prelim, so we saw what happened in the back half of the year for them. Freo at home, that was a bit of a nothing game. The highlight obviously being Will Ashcroft's goal of the year for that day.
Also, the highlight was the absolute verbal up and at 'em that Fremantle got for handballing the ball 1 billion times.
Yeah.
In the first quarter, it was like, goodness me, look at them move the ball. It's like they lost by 50 points.
Yeah, but at least they were doing something, because everyone was just so bored of watching Freo at that point because they're not winning. They're playing boring
who's
football.
Who's watching Freo, though? Like, who's actually watching Freo ever, other than, like, their 14 fans?
Well, I mean, they're fans, obviously.
And Nat 5 from the sideline.
But I think that was probably it. It's like, well, they're not winning, and I don't like watching them. At least they're trying something here. It didn't work, but, if they stick with it, maybe it will. I don't know. I'm trying to make an excuse for Freo here. They've just lost more players again. There's obviously something going on there, and Justin Longmuir is the most boring person I've ever seen, heard, looked at.
But he's really tall.
He is deceptively tall. Then we had some good games against Carlton and Essendon at that stage. Essendon were looking like, a semi-decent team. They'd peeled off wins against Melbourne, and, they'd played some good footy against some good teams. They really clogged up the back line. I remember that game was like the first game where Charlie Cameron got completely shut out by Andy McGrath. And they clogged up the back line and really just stifled our scoring, because at that stage we were just kicking 100 points for fun. And this was the first time we failed to do that for a while after a really good game against Carlton the week before.
Yeah, that game against Carlton really sent things into a bit of a tailspin for them, which they ultimately recovered from. So, It was a good game. I like that Carlton game. It was so fun seeing the fans all leave. It's one of the highlights of my season. Yeah, it was in this weird period of time, right, where we were sort of winning games whilst being like kind of convincingly on reflection. It seemed like they weren't as convincing as they were, but you can't really argue with over that period of time. Sort of just like a roughly 40-point wins on average every week. So
Yeah, 100%. And then came the two games. The Adelaide game you can sort of make excuses for because we, pretty much dominated, especially that third quarter where we kicked, what was it, 1 goal 9, 1 goal 10, something like that.
yeah,
Tex Walker, Rochelle and Rankin, they were just putting through goals that shouldn't be going through, and we could not kick a goal to save ourselves. A few little things go differently. We win that game, but it was one that we let slip, and then we had the bye, come back from the bye, and as we found out, everyone who comes back from the bye and plays a team that hasn't had the bye is going to suffer the consequences, and we got completely outplayed in every facet by Hawthorn.
Yeah, that's one that I've kind of blotted out from my memory. So much that I didn't even realise that Gardner had played that game. And that sort of proved to be a bit of unfortunately, was Daniel Rich's last AFL game.
Yeah, that's right.
Ultimately. Which, yeah, I mean, a great career. I think his career wasn't spoken about as much as some other players, but bit of a shame. It sort of just happened at a period of time where there was other news and it got missed by sort of like 360 and Couch and stuff like that, whereas they did quite big packages for a lot of the other retiring players. Showed footage and etc. They even showed footage of Marcus Adams. So that was a bit disappointing. But yeah, I mean, that Hawthorn game, it looked bad from the beginning. It looks bad on reflection and,
That was our last loss for a couple of games as well. Took on Sydney in a bit of an okay performance. It's just at that stage we were just happy to get a win again, I suppose.
Yeah, I think pressure was on just to get the points and kind of move forward with our lives after. Yeah, I think, as you said, a couple of games that just seemed a bit off. Like, luck wasn't with us with Adelaide and Hawthorn. We didn't make our own luck, so we got what we deserved in that one. But yeah, the Sydney game, they didn't have any Franklin there. I mean, Sydney's sort of, they hadn't really clicked at that point in time, which is so, I mean, heading to the back half of the year, like, they looked pretty bad.
Yeah.
I don't know how they managed to put it together, but maybe the following week in that 171-point win against West Coast might have done something towards that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, like a lot of these games sort of fall back a bit into like a level of obscurity, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of... St Kilda down at Marvel, that was the Harris Andrews game where he just dominated. They couldn't get any ball movement, but still managed to stifle our scoring enough but it was never really in doubt. The big game against Richmond, it's always good to beat Richmond at the Gabba, 81 points. They weren't playing terrible footy, they weren't playing great footy, but to get an 81-point win against Richmond is always a good feeling. Follow that up with another 81 against West Coast the following week. Jack Gunston kicked 6 that week, and then the game against Melbourne in the MCG.
I think the Richmond game probably within that group of games with Richmond, they'd won 6 and lost 1 around it. So probably ends up being ultimately less good of a performance given their whole season output. But at the time, it seemed pretty handy. I think that was a cathartic one for us. I think I described it at the time of just like, we were happy to really just kill them.
Yeah.
And kind of almost hurt them because it's sort of like, where did the Richmond doll hurt you? It's like fucking everywhere for a while.
Yeah,
so,
it's just been, just like, it's obviously not one of the great rivalries of AFL, but over the last sort of 4 or 5 years where they've been winning premierships and we've been coming up against them in finals, and that game against the MCG where we had it in the bag and then let it slip in the last moments. Just we got a little bit of a history with Richmond, so to get the win there is always good, and especially just to make them hurt was a really great feeling. Yeah,
it's interesting because people tend to talk about rivalries in football and stuff like that. A lot of the time, the kind of the team just beating up on a team for a bunch of years whilst they're in different stages of development, and then that sort of power shift.
Yep.
There's fun elements of it in football, and that gets lost because it's not really a traditional rivalry. Because you tend to, I mean, we probably had a crossover point of a couple of years where we were probably on par, but we maybe weren't there yet.
Yep.
A little bit. We still scrapped a couple of wins, but yeah, it was a bit of a domination, and it was just, yeah, as I said, quite a cathartic thing. But it is an odd facet of the game, the idea that your teams can have rivalries that sort of shift in terms of who's expected and things like that. But it's just, I guess, the way of the draft system and the way of the kind of rigmarole and washing machine of the football. So, yeah, the Melbourne game.
Our best footy. Our best footy without the result. 10 minutes either side. You know, they kicked the first 4 in about 3.5 minutes. Petrarca, I think, kicked 2 or 3 of them. And then about almost towards the end of the first quarter, through till the last 10 minutes of the game, we played outstanding footy at the MCG. And then just, let's drop Jack Gunston behind the ball with, 10 minutes left and start bombing it down the line to Max Gorn, which, was just horrible. But still, walked away from that game with a fairly decent feeling about where we were, despite not getting the result.
Yeah, I think I lost my head a little bit at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough.
I wasn't feeling particularly positive about, it felt very like, okay, here we are again. I mean, yeah, the putting the player behind the ball, we saw that in the grand final and it didn't go well. So hopefully with new strategy, new defensive input, we can maybe try and, I think, as I said, after the grand final, do it properly in terms of that. If we're going to lock the game down, do it properly. Don't just kind of half-ass it. So bounce back with a pretty interesting, I mean, people don't think it is interesting, but I thought it was a very interesting game against Geelong.
Yep.
The kind of tactical, nuanced masterclass sort of thing where they sort of didn't have a shot within sort of threat range inside 35 metres.
They barely hit the scoreboard until the last quarter as well. I think, up until 3/4 time, they'd only got 26 points on the board. 11 points to halftime, which is very unlike Geelong in a team that's got some, fairly handy forwards. They got Brad Close. I can't remember exactly who played that day, but, Hawkins, Cameron, Rowan, Myers. I know there was not all of those played on the day, but they've got goal scoring power. And chuck in Henry there as well, who can hit the scoreboard as well. So, it was one of those games where we've watched Geelong, especially in a couple of prelims, just beat us up in the midfield. And so to finally not just get the win, but beat them up in the midfield was, for all those reasons you said before, quite cathartic, quite a good feeling to know that, this is a different Brisbane Lions team that's not going to just get smashed in the middle anymore.
Well, we showed, I guess, in certain games that we were just able to sort of wrestle back control. And, even if you look at it in a microcosm of the 2 Port Adelaide games, it's like, heading into I know I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but like we were terrified of the speed and burst from Port Adelaide's midfield, and just to have our guys sort of say no, essentially. Also, just as you said, the Geelong game was obviously the infamous Ashcroft injury. Yeah. And how better to show how important a first-year player was than to take him out and to really have a bit of a gulf in quality for the next sort of few games. We really struggled to make up for that and to kind of get the right balance. So,
yeah. Well, I say, this is a team that's not going to get beat up in the middle anymore. Fast forward to the next week where we got absolutely smacked from the Suns. And, I'm sure, you could see how much that game meant to Touk Miller. And a lot of the Suns players, actually. But you're speaking before about our win against Richmond, and there's something to be said about coming back against a team that's beaten you up for a few years. I'm sure that win for Suns fans and Suns players meant just as much, because obviously we've just picked on the Suns for years now. What was it, 9-10 in a row, by an average of 40-plus points. So for them to really come out and smack us, that must have felt good for those guys.
I don't give a shit.
How did I know you'd say that?
Yeah, well, quotables. Touk Miller can take his grippy hands and take them elsewhere.
All right. Well, a couple of close wins against Freo over there, where Joe Danaher really stepped up in that last quarter, well, in the last sort of 5 minutes, and scraped us over the line there. And then Adelaide back at the Gabba, some really close wins before heading down to Marvel Stadium to play Collingwood. That was missing Degoe, Moore, Dacos, but still a pretty resounding win for us down there.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
It was a fun one, and it probably gave us a false sense of security.
It's frustrating to look back at the two Collingwood games and be like, they were good performances, and then just damn it,
Yeah.
Collingwood, why? So yeah, it's kind of. I think I tried to do it. I tried to watch KO's best things of the Lions this year. And it was like beating Collingwood, and I was like, oh, dude, why? Just put any other highlights on. Why does it have to be like Charlie Cameron's 11 goals against Collingwood or whatever?
Yeah.
But I guess because they were good at the time, and they felt good at the time. So that was obviously the weekend of my brother's wedding.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I had to watch that one on delay.
A nothing game against St Kilda to finish things off, but just important to get the win to lock up that top 2 finish.
So despite everything, we finished second.
Yeah.
Which seemed unassailable at about whenever it was, round 20. We were like, there's a lot of things that have to go our way here. And ultimately, they went our way. Port Adelaide capitulated. Melbourne capitulated.
Yes.
Couldn't say anything more that I liked than that. Where are we a little bit petty to be kind of like happy about these straight set exits?
No.
I would resoundingly say absolutely not.
No, bugger 'em. I mean...
And Melbourne are really showing their true colours with kicking walls and bending windscreen wipers and doing drugs. What are they?
Nothing game against St Kilda to finish things off, and then a huge win against Port Adelaide in the qualifying final, speaking of straight sets. And then a weird but very good game against Carlton in the prelim, where we let them get off to a 5-goal head start before going, you know what? I don't think we're going to do that. We might actually play some football now.
Yeah, that was one of the stranger games, I think. Crowd played a factor. AFL ticketing nonsense. I don't know. Sod Carlton. That's all I got to say about them.
All right, well, they'll be back, so don't worry about them. We'll be back. And then we won't talk about the grand final because we've already done that. Everyone's already done that. That's in the books. We'll be back next year as well.
Yeah, have you brought yourself to...
Nope.
Get in touch anytime. Shoot us an email at blfancast@gmail.com or join the Discord.
Last week, I had a message from... Well, actually, it was probably a few weeks ago now, actually, to be fair. From Liam, who's part of our Discord. He said that he loved the Grand Final podcast, had an idea for a podcast in postseason on All-time Brisbane Lions 22, including sub. Now, I put mine together last week. I sent it to you. I put it out on Twitter, and it's received some feedback, as you can imagine.
I can imagine that the latest and fullest certain games of certain Starceviches wasn't taken particularly well.
Yeah. Now, you can have a look at this. It's posted on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just look for BL Fancast, Brisbane Lions Fancast. It'll pop up there. Most of the positions were generally agreed upon. Now, when I put this out, I did say that it was going to be a post-2000s team, and that some players were picked speculatively, because otherwise I could have just picked the 01 to 03 team and no one would have had an issue with it. But I figured...
Oh, and Favola, obviously, based on his post-2000.
So I did put Starcevic in the back pocket. He probably received the most amount of criticism. So I did say that him, my full forward of Lynch, and my ruckman of Charman were probably the positions I wasn't 100% sold on. The other one being Mitch Robinson as the sub. I did say, and I couldn't have been more clear, that Mitch Robinson as the sub made it on funny points. The idea of Mitch Robinson coming in as a sub in any sort of all-time...
We've talked about that, like the idea of him being like the perfect sub.
Yeah. And that was it. There was no other real reason. So he made it in. So my back six were Starcevic, Andrews, Chris Johnson, Daniel Rich, Justin Lepage, and Daryl White. So a lot of people had Mal Michael in as a third
Yeah.
tall over Brendan Starcevich. No complaints there. No complaints.
That was my first thing, because
Yeah.
I think Mal Michael is absolutely god mode in
Yep.
in massive games, and like even in the 04 grand final he was so good, until that all fell apart. And also he just does not get the recognition that he deserves. And you
Another.
should know that.
Yeah,
You should know that he doesn't get he never got an All Australian.
I know.
So, I mean, we talked about that. So he is straight in a lock for me. If I'm going back to front, he was probably would have been the first name on my sheet by the nature of that.
Others had Chris Scott in that position as well in the back six. So Starcevich was one of my speculative picks. I think by the time that his career wraps up, I think that position will be his. It really depends on if you want 2-3 talls down back there as well. So the other one was Charman. I did say that I thought, generally speaking, talent-wise, Jamie Charman was probably the best ruck we've had on our list. A lot of people went Keating as well, because obviously he made a name for himself in the finals, in the grand final as our ruckman. Once again, I think that position could potentially be Oscar McInerney's by the time he finishes his career as well. But I think, just generally speaking, as ruckman go, and Leuenberger, fantastic ruckman as well. We just never really got the most out of him either. I just think Charman was our best all-around ruckman that we've had on our list at any stage. And
He should have played in 2002, but it didn't.
Lynch, I had at full forward. That position could very well be Joe Danaher's by the time he wraps up. I had Bradshaw on the bench. I just couldn't really think of any other real key forwards that have lit it up. I had Brown and Lynch as our key forwards. Zorko, Charlie Cameron, Ackermanis and McRae as your other forwards. I had McCluggage and Lappin on the wing, Voss, Neil, Black in the centre. And on the bench, Sean Hart, Tim Notting, Luke Power, Bradshaw. Other people had Martin Pike in instead of Notting and swapped a few things around. Marcus Ashcroft made a few people's teams there as well.
I think Ashcroft probably, because you're saying it's a post-2000s.
Yeah.
So his best footy. But I'd lump Craig McRae in with that. I think his best footy was in the 90s.
And so was Lynch's as well.
Yeah. But I mean,
I guess my post 2000 meant I wasn't going to go back and pick like Bernie Quinlan or Kevin Murray.
Yeah.
I guess that was more it. It was more like the Brisbane Lions era rather than because otherwise I could be there forever. And just picking plays based on stats and reputation rather than first-hand experience, I suppose, is what I really ended up going for. Other people sort of had Tom Rockcliffe sort of thrown in the mix, and Dane Beams could have been another one, but I sort of just didn't really pick anyone from 2007 to 2016. But those were the two that potentially could have made it.
Yeah, it is. It's a pretty fine team, I'd say. My feelings about certain people named T Notting. He's getting nowhere near it in mine. But yeah, it is a little bit difficult to kind of my default is to sort of look at the 2001 team and then sub in from there of who's better than those players.
Yeah, it's basically what I sort of did. I probably tried to overcompensate and put a little bit too many of today's players in just to, I don't know, spice it up and make sure it wasn't just, hey, here's the 2001 team. How good was that? Yay.
With Daniel Rich and Zorko running around.
Yeah. I mean, Charlie Cameron, McCluggage, Harris Andrews, Neil are the ones that made it through.
But yeah, I think for me, I'm putting Mal Michael in.
Yep.
I'm putting Crackers in. And then I'm probably putting the two Scots in some which way, taking out Notting.
Yeah.
And, Craig McRae, just because I'm angry with him and I don't have his pair of socks that he gave me as a child because I don't know where they went.
Okay. Are you leaving Robbo as your sub, or are you making someone else sub?
Yeah, I mean, sub. I'm taking Robbo out for one of the Scots, but I don't think that Brad Scott's a particularly good sub. Because, you want to have both Scott brothers in there like the ravenous wolves that they are.
Sure.
And you've got to have the trifecta of, I mean, well, you could have the quadruple. Yeah, look, let's put Luke Power as the sub because I think he was made to look a lot better by the players around him, but he was still pretty handy. So,
I mean, you don't get to 300 games by luck, surely.
I didn't say that he was lucky.
All right. Okay. Luke Power, the sub, fair enough.
He's got those little legs to run around with.
He's back working with Vossi at Carlton now, so, hopefully we can get someone like that in our coaching staff at some point over the next, sooner rather than later, I guess.
Is there an element of regret that we've kind of, not us as a club, and I don't think it was done intentionally, and it also probably was not done one way. The idea of all of these ex-premiership players coaching around the league, and none of them sort of have any kind of affiliation with the Lions. That stings a little bit because the idea that we had Voss and we had Lepic, and Voss went poorly because I think there was that CEO that was an absolute moron.
Yeah.
And also the mixed signals of like, we want to develop and play finals football. It's like, you can't do that. It's not possible. And also you should have known what was going on before the aforementioned GWS draft pilfering was about to come in. And I think Vossi was probably a little bit green.
Well, yeah, he went straight into a senior coaching position with bloody no experience.
And then Lepic was obviously a massive and possibly more damaging debacle. But then to see the Scots, to see a lot of names in assistant coaching roles, it's like you look at it and go, why are we not utilizing that? Because we're in a position where, like, Fagan, I don't think wants to coach for all that much longer.
No.
Because I think, remembering some of the stuff he said, it's not great for his health. I mean, your heart rate was like nearly collapsing in the grand final, and you're about half the age of Fagan.
Yeah.
So, give or take. Probably give.
Maybe.
How old are you?
I'm about to turn 33 quite shortly. Well,
so we're the same age.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, like it just seems odd that we're not kind of flooding. I know we had with Jed Adcock, but he's a different generation.
Yeah.
To see guys like Luke Power and Lappin and stuff like that. Even McRae and Lepic again. Voss was at Port Adelaide. It's like, is there a rift between, I'm not going to say between the playing group and the idea of the club, but the playing group at that time and the current club?
I wouldn't have thought so because, they're all, in the lead up to the finals and grand final and stuff, it sounded like more, most of them were happy to come back and chat to the group and, premiership reunions and all that sort of stuff with the current players. And I think, there could be an element of like, well, I need to expand my horizons and not just stay tied to this club. Yeah, I'm loyal with my playing career or whatnot, but, when it comes to coaching, it's good to get other experiences and learn under, other coaches as well. I just think it's coincidence more than anything that there might be a little bit of, well, look what happened to Vossi and Lepic. Why would I go back there? Maybe they're trying to forge their own future and not hang on to the past. So I don't think there's anything too much to read into it. I think it's just coincidence more than anything.
Yeah, it is a bit of a shame because it does feel, I guess, like if Voss and Lepic had both been in like a assistant capacity for a lot, I suppose if Voss had been in there in an assistant capacity for longer, then probably Lepic would be kind of inconsequential. But I think the club's obviously in a much stronger place in terms of the way that it's run now. I'd like to see some of the Premiership era players come back and cut their teeth a little bit. I think that would be good, and we're in need of it at this point in time. Obviously, Ackermanis strategy coach.
No.
Probably not a great idea.
No. No.
No.
What about this as a scenario? Vegas has got 2 years to go, and then by that stage, Tassie will probably start coming into the league, so he might sign another 1 or 2 year deal depending on where we are as a club. What if by the time Fagan ends up, call it 2-3 years, would you be willing to see Voss come back as a senior head coach?
Yeah, I guess it probably depends. I don't love his game style. Like I don't love the Carlton game style at the moment, but I suppose it just depends on whether it would be adaptable enough, with what we've got going on. But I think everyone would like to see Vossi kind of come back to the Lions and at least sort of right some of the wrongs that had happened.
Yeah.
In some sort of capacity. And I suppose at this point in time, it would only really be as a head coach. Yeah, I'd like to see it, but also it kind of turns my stomach a little bit, given that he's sort of with Carlton, and I don't like Carlton.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, it's probably never going to happen. It was just a little bit of food for thought. It's the only person I could sort of...
What about Buckley?
Honestly,
where it all began.
Honestly, yeah, that would be awesome. I really like Nathan Buckley these days. I had every reason.
I think he's crafted his his public image in quite a good way. And I suppose when you sit next to Gary Lyon on a Monday night, oh man, you could have the Energizer Bunny dude, that psychotic dude. He would look like he has a brain next to Gary Lyon. Wacko Jacko. Because Gary Lyon is an absolute waste of space. So that's my thoughts on the media
well, there you go. Nice little
perspective of the entire league.
Nice little drive-by for Gary Lyon on the way out.
Should I do, you did your team. Should I do a tiered rank of all of the media?
Sure, go for it.
A tier list? I don't know. I'm sure that doesn't exist as a thing. I'm going to have to find pictures of Caroline Wilson and Kane Corns to go in my S tier. And then the chaff below with David King as a big middle of the road.
All right, well, you have fun with your media list. Is there anything else semi-football related you think we need to have a chat about before we wrap this bad boy up?
Maybe. Fuck it. We'll do it next year in the pre-season.
Okay.
I was just players that might surprise us next year, but who cares?
We will come back with that at some point. I'll put together another little AFLW piece next week. We've got a couple of games to catch up on. So,
what pick do you reckon Levi's going to go?
Oh,
He's going to be a top tenner.
Yeah, he'd probably be a top tenner.
We should just start tanking his career now, so we can pick him up at in 40.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, obviously, let's not do that. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything else to say.
Lovely. All right. Well, stay on the mend, and we'll be back at some point, I believe. Maybe after draft or something. Maybe we'll put together... We'll liaise and maybe have another podcast before the year's out. But, yeah, we'll be back.
But I do want to leave you on one thing. You little beauty!